Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the Invasive Species Center webinar series. My name is Jen Wagner, and I am the Zooplankton Diagnostics and Research Intern at the Invasive Species Center, and I will be your moderator for today. I would like to acknowledge that the Invasive Species Center honors the long history of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation peoples on the lands now known as Canada, and strives to show respect to their ancestors, their communities, and to them individually. We greatly appreciate the significance of the lands, waters, and all living things, and offer our gratitude to Indigenous peoples for their care and teachings about our Earth. Our relationships with Indigenous communities are important, and we will continue to listen and learn how we can be in good relationship with Indigenous peoples, the lands and waters, and all living things. The Invasive Species Center acknowledges that our head office is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Batchewana and Garden River First Nations, as well as the longtime settlement of the Métis people in the Robinson-Huron Treaty area. The Invasive Species Center connects stakeholders, knowledge, and technology to prevent and reduce the spread of invasive species that harm Canada's environment, economy, and society. Incorporated as a not-for-profit in 2011, the Invasive Species Center is a hub for collaboration and knowledge sharing. The center is a respected partner and leader in invasive species science, education, and action. We got lots of great invasive species resources on our website, including species profiles, best management practices, and more. So be sure to check us out at invasivespeciescenter.ca. You can also sign up on our homepage for our newsletter, bi-weekly media scan, and event invitations, which is where you can hear about upcoming webinars as well. Our training program also offers virtual courses on topics related to invasive species. We currently have 4 different courses available, but we'll be releasing new content regularly, so stay tuned for that. Make sure to check out our website and sign up to receive updates on when these new courses become available. There will be time for questions at the end of the webinar, so if you have a question at any time, please type it in the question box and I will read it to a presenter after the webinar, or after their presentation. If you are having technical difficulties at any time, please type them in the chat box or respond to the email found in your registration, and we will try and resolve that for you. We have also enabled closed captioning, so if you would like to follow along with the presentation that way, you can turn that on with your closed caption button, which you can find on your taskbar. And lastly, there will be a very brief survey following the webinar, so if you could take the time to fill that out, we would greatly appreciate it. Before I introduce you all to today's speaker, I would just like to note that today's presentation is from a private business, and as such, the ISC wants to recognize that we do not directly endorse any products or businesses, and the purpose of today's webinar is to inform on the management initiatives undertaken to support healthy ecosystems. Today's webinar is titled D.A.S.H, Diver-Assisted Suction Harvesting for Invasive Aquatic Plant Removal, and I am pleased to introduce our speaker, Keith Bray. After co-funding an environmental testing lab, Keith purchased Integrated Lakes Management Incorporation and grew the company tenfold by expanding the existing lake management services to include shoreline restoration, dredging, upland watershed management, including winter removal of buckthorn, and innovative wetland restoration and management practices. To be clear, much of ILMS's success is because of the incredible team Keith has been able to assemble. Under his leadership, staff are encouraged to think outside of the box, develop and test new equipment and techniques, and collaborate to develop ways to provide value to ILM clients. While D.A.S.H is not a new concept, the ILM team has been able to build upon new ideas to improve and expand on common practices. Looking ahead, ILM is focusing on other non-chemical methods of improving water quality and habitat in surface waters affected by urbanization. So thank you very much to Keith for joining us today. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and pass it over to you.
All right, Lisa. Jen, thank you very much. We're switching screens here, so stand by. All right, we're having some technical difficulties. I don't know what to do with these. Stand back, please. We good? All right, I think we're good. So again, Jen, thank you for the introduction. And I think something that's in that bio is noteworthy, and that is the culture of ILM. We're continuing to look for better ways to achieve the end result, right? And that's to improve our water features, our natural lakes, and the conveyances that feed them. And the reason we get excited about giving presentations like this is because the more feedback we get and the more hard questions that are asked, I think the quicker we all get to where we need to be. So, we're casting a wide net, no pun intended there. We're casting a very wide net by exposing our experiences to others, sharing those experiences and challenges, and getting feedback. So I encourage anybody that is questioning anything we do or has some ideas, or if something's not clear, to please, let's have dialogue here at the end. I'm going to leave time at the end to do that so that we can learn from each other. And like I said, get to where we want to be faster.
Sorry to interrupt you, Keith. I don't believe we can see your slide deck.
All right. You're not seeing anything from me right now?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay. Don't pay any attention to this. I know that.
Right.
We get correct.
Yeah, because I can't. Okay, any luck?
No, I don't see it at the moment. At the bottom of your tab, there should be a green button that says share screen.
I have that. I'm working, unfortunately, here it is. I have three, all right, how about that?
Yep, I can see it. I can see your slides on the side, so I believe it needs to go in
Okay.
So
presenters
you go
mode.
to that thing that she was
No, I'm
talking
not doing it.
about. All right. Yeah, that one right there. Okay.
Never done it
Jen, are we going to get crazy if we click that little icon that you showed us earlier?
Nope, that should be good.
My problem is I can't get this thing to go to slideshow. I don't know what's happening because it keeps. It's
Use the mouse pad. Can you see it?
You can see your presentation. It's not yet in presenters mode. So if you can see at the top left in that red bar, there's that little icon I showed you. Yep, double click that.
no, it's not
You
working.
could also try hitting start from beginning on the far left, top far left.
Not going. Says we're screen sharing and you're not seeing anything, no?
I can see your screen. It's just not in presenters mode, but if you want to progress this way, just how your screen is now, that's okay too.
Do anything new that I've never done before because it's just screen. Typically, this says start from the beginning, which I'm doing, but it's not doing it.
Are you double clicking?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah,
If you guys just want to,
million times before, so why don't I try again?
oh, that looks great.
We got it?
Yep, you got it.
Yay, I just had to try again. All right, try 3 times and technology works. Okay.
Okay, I'm back. So here we go. We did some of this. I bought Integrated Lakes Management with the intent of really trying to improve traditional methods of lake and pond management, and to get away from, I don't want to cast aspersions on the traditional ways of doing things, but you know, in the world we live in, you know, the reliance oftentimes on the chemicals and the quick fixes are often more detrimental than the problem itself, and so we're trying to peel that back and be science-based and look at what we could do to strike a balance. What we're going to talk about is the removal, a technique used for Starry Stonewort. I've given this presentation before, and I'm sprinkled in within this presentation are some, I guess, some new realizations on our part. And so if you've seen this before, I guess I apologize, but sit tight. There's going to be some new news here that we'd like to share and hopefully get some feedback on. But this is the equipment we used on Keuka Lake, and Keuka Lake was new for us because it was the first time we used D.A.S.H for Starry Stonewort. We'll talk about the table where the two operators are standing. It's called the sorting table. And if you can see, the person closest to us, is right hand, is above the burlap bag. So for those who may not know, D.A.S.H oftentimes pumps the water and the target material, in this case, Starry Stonewort, but sometimes it's milfoil or something else, pumps it right through these burlap bags. The water drains out of the burlap bag, and oftentimes fragments or undesirable byproducts make it back to the water. And it creates sometimes more problems than, again, that we started with. So I'll talk a little bit about the advantages of this and even some of the challenges presented by it. Oh, here's a little video. So we see the material coming up on the sorting table, and after the water drains through the sorting table, and it's a series of filters on that table, and it goes back down into the water, by the way, in a submerged way, so we're not kicking up a lot of sediment. But the second operator is then pulling the we'll call it the dewatered material over the screen and into that burlap bag. So the step here that's unique is that sorting table. It's still definitely going into the bag, and you need the bags to move the material back to shore, right? There's only so much weight that can be had on this vessel. And as those bags fill on the vessel, we've got to shuttle them back to the shore. We don't want to lose our position. We don't want to lose time shutting down and having to go back and forth. So there's a secondary John boat that moves these full bags back and forth. So why D.A.S.H? Why was D.A.S.H used for Starry Stonewort, or why did we attempt to use it for Starry Stonewort? And by the way, a spoiler alert, it worked well. So it's a good ending, I think. But why D.A.S.H? Well, if you use traditional harvesting methods, fragmentation is a big deal. If you cut it and try to collect it, so much of the material escapes your process and can reestablish itself. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're looking for new, better, more innovative ways to manage lakes and ponds. And we first try to look at chemical-free ways of doing it. We work in Illinois and Wisconsin quite a bit. Wisconsin has done some studies looking at the efficacy of copper products on Starry Stonewort. The jury's out on that. If you talk to the Wisconsin folks, the DNR folks, they'll tell you it's not recommended, it doesn't work. If you talk to some of the commercial applicators and our counterparts in the lake management world, they'll say it does work. The timing of it's important, and the isolation or the exposure to the product for a certain period of time is what's required. So, you know, you're dealing with maybe sediment curtains around a certain target area, concentrations that are probably quite high, but they're saying it can be effective. So the official position in Wisconsin is it doesn't. The unofficial, I'm talking about chemicals, the unofficial is it does. And in Illinois, no one has actually done any studies there, and it's kind of the Wild West. So people are doing what they can, however they think is appropriate. The other part about D.A.S.H that is attractive to us is that it's selective. right? So the diver is underwater. He can identify stands, large stands of the target species, and he can concentrate solely on those. Even if Starry Stonewort is interspersed with other plants that are desirable, he can work around those and leave the desirable plants in place in the hopes that they propagate now with the void as a result of the harvest. So we feel that the restorative process is jump-started when you can use a more selective approach to Starry Stonewort control. I think it's still a little bit too early to tell, and there's really not enough test plots out there to draw some conclusions, I think, anytime soon. So, as I said in the beginning, this is a work in progress. We're looking for ideas, we're looking for partners, and if anybody has any thoughts on that, we're certainly open to hear them. Lastly, it's wildlife safe. This is something that we didn't plan on, but when the diver's down doing his thing, and oftentimes, and this is a great photo, by the way, if you see behind the diver, there's a bit of a cloud, a plume of kicked up sediment. So he has to work towards areas that are open so he has good visibility on the target. Inadvertently, he can pick up some interesting stuff. I mean, certainly fish, amphibians, frogs, nymphs, depending upon where we're working and what season it is. It's interesting what's come across on that table in the process of harvesting Starry Stonewort. And when we're sorting on that table and letting the water fall out and then moving the target material into the burlap bags, we're also able to collect and then return critters back to the water if it's a desirable species or a native species. If we're pulling up carp and that lake has a particular problem with carp, we may pull those aside and get those out of the ecosystem. But that wildlife safe thing has been a big surprise for us, and we're quite pleased with that. The first study we did was in Keuka Lake in the Finger Lakes region in New York. The lady on the right, Marie, was the advocate for this process, and she worked to get funding from Cornell University, the woman on the left. And this was really a cutting edge project. And we traveled from the Chicago region up to the Finger Lakes, not because it was easy. It was a 12-hour drive, but because we were one of the few companies that were willing to modify what we did and really work collaboratively with our client here, because we wanted to gain the knowledge. So we were grateful to them to give us this chance. Marie has a beautiful house on the lake and has a guest room or guest rooms. So our guys were, after the first go around there, were all signing up to spend a week or two up in beautiful upstate New York. So, big shout out to these two ladies. They worked very, very hard. So I'll talk a little bit about what we were presented with in Keuka Lake. These were the hot spots. The red is where it was identified. The green is where it was not. The conveyance to the upper part of this image, you can see, I mean, this is where it's coming from. It seemed to manifest itself kind of at the mouth of the lake, and then it seemed to travel down along the shore quite a bit. Now, a lot of that has to do with water depth. I mean, obviously, it's not going to grow in super deep water. And then you see where the yellow circle is a marina. And what we found is that the boat traffic in that marina, and we'll see this in later slides, really did a effective job at tearing up that stand of Starry Stonewort and allowing it to spread. So that we thought the river was going to be the epicenter of the problem. I mean, it certainly was the start of the problem, but very, very quickly it seemed like the best place to focus was going to be at the marina. And here's a picture of literally the target underneath a docked boat. So when this operator gets in the boat and they want to go out and have a great time on the lake, they're going to drop that motor in and turn their propeller forward or backwards to move their vessel. And the density is just incredible, as you might imagine. By the way, Starry Stonewort is a non-floating growth. it's very high in calcium, and its specific gravity, causes it to sink, whereas many aquatic plants, once they're cut or detached from their anchor, want to float. Not the case with Starry Stonewort. So, you can be kicking up all kinds of Starry Stonewort and spreading it and really never have evidence of it from the surface. So again, this was kind of an eye opener for us, where we saw how concentrated it was in the high traffic areas. It's also spread by anchors, right? So you drop anchor, you fish, or you're sunbathing, you pull your anchor up, you go somewhere and redrop anchor. This is what you get. This is actually the anchor off of our vessel. So it's thick, it's there, and boy, how easy would that be to move it from one part of the lake to the other? Fishing tackle, of course, we know about, and boat trailers are other sources. But to me, it's really the anchors, and more likely the shallow areas where there's high boat traffic that's causing the very rapid spread of Starry Stonewort. So our dashboat operation is 3, and we probably could do it with 2 if we had some local volunteers, and certainly cost is an issue. And when we're traveling, there's per diems and all that. So if you're considering Starry Stonewort, there are 2 jobs on a dash boat that can be done with very, very little training and maybe volunteers. So a diver, that requires some amount of training, and it requires endurance. I'll be honest, I've done it. And when you're in the water and you're moving for 4 hours, it's exhausting. It's like aqua aerobics, but you're doing it for 4 hours, and you need a break. And so really what we like to do is to have somebody in the water until they're tired. Safety is a big issue, of course. And maybe that person that's up on that sorting table is also a diver, and these guys can switch and give each other a break. The third person would be the shuttle guy, running the filled burlap bags back to shore, maybe grabbing lunch or fuel or whatever it is we need from shore. Once the boat is anchored and we have a set grid that we're working, you don't want to pick up and move if you can avoid it at all. So even at the end of the day, it's really best to leave that boat there so you know where you're starting tomorrow, and run the John boat back and forth to shuttle people and or supplies. So again, if we send 2 people in a boat and there was a local help to be a shuttle person or a sorting table person, that can lower the cost. Of note, there is the 4th bullet point. We do use headset communication. If somebody's underwater and he needs the boat to turn a certain way because his hose doesn't have enough play in it, or he's blocking sunlight, or there's a variety of things that require communication. Again, not the least of which is safety. We like to have that ability to talk to them. If he's got to come up, take the helmet off, yell at the guys on the boat, and we make adjustments, you're losing time. And so again, it's about, being consistent, being productive. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but it's again a little reference back to the folks in New York, who kind of took a chance on this. And to do harvesting using D.A.S.H required a permit. The permits were written, I guess, in consideration of what we'll call more traditional methods of aquatic plant or aquatic growth control. And they talked about specifically hand harvesting, right? And in essence, that's what we're doing underwater, is we're hand harvesting. And we're then using the suction system to transport the harvested material back to the boat, right? So number 8 is called suction harvesting. That refers back to hand harvesting. So I'll read it quickly. Vegetation must be pulled and removed from the sediment by hand, and fed into the suction harvesting nozzle. So that sounds good. It makes sense. What we learned is that in pulling it and feeding it, a lot of sediment is kicked up and it reduces visibility. And Starry Stonewort has such a we'll call it light anchoring system. It comes up incredibly easy, that really suctioning right into the intake hose pulled up sediment and pulled the target up so that it left water clarity, enabling the operator to see more. So technically, we weren't hand pulling and feeding the way the permit said. We modified that, and it turned out to work incredibly well. We explained this to the DEQ folks who were out visiting and watching this, and not only does our client very amenable to changes while we were out there, because we were kind of doing some researchy technique stuff, but the DEQ folks, or I'm sorry, the DEC folks, those are the two people out in the kayaks, were out watching what we were doing. They were looking at the effects of the process. They too were learning, because the permit needed to be modified to allow for not hand pulling and feeding, but a direct feed into the intake hose. I think one of the goals in writing the permit they wrote was to maybe protect wildlife. I really didn't get into a conversation with it, but it makes sense, right? So if you're worried about maybe freshwater mussels, or you're worried about, fish, small fish, or turtles, or those things, and you are using a traditional D.A.S.H process that pumps from the water directly into the bags, you'll never see those critters. They go right into the bags, and then the bag goes to compost, and all that wildlife is removed from the ecosystem. By hand pulling and feeding, I guess theoretically you're giving the critters a chance to get away, or you have the ability to shake those guys out of your harvest, your hand harvest, once you feed it into the pipe. But because we had the D.A.S.H table there, right, where what's coming up is highly visible and accessible, going right into the pipe and giving those critters a ride up into the boat where they can be identified and returned to the water really allows for reconsideration of some of those permit conditions that take into account the process itself. So, again, for those people who are out in the audience and are regulators, I think it's something to consider is what, why is the permit written the way it is? Why is that specification there? Well, it's to protect, the wildlife or whatever. Yes, but if the process has provisions that allow for the responsible return of those critters to the water, is that something that can be negotiated or modified or whatever? So I don't have all the answers, and the more I look into different state rules regarding permitting, the more complicated it gets for me. But I think in the end, it's stepping back, looking at what are we trying to do, what's the goal, and how do we best achieve it, and then to work together to figure out a way to get there. So I hope this runs. This is a little video, and it's what I was talking about. You're looking at the nozzle of the D.A.S.H process. That's the big brass thing there. And the target plant is, of course, this green hairy stuff. And you will see how easy this stuff comes up. I hope you'll see how easy it comes up. Right? So you see the sediment being kicked up, and it's going up into the D.A.S.H boat itself. And it's giving our guy great visibility. Oh my God, this is a dream when you work with this. Oftentimes these lakes have such poor visibility, and you're hoping you're not picking up the desirable plants or wildlife that you don't need to be picking up. But when we showed this video to regulators, they're like, yeah, that hand pulling and then feeding is not only going to slow you down, it's not only going to possibly break the fibers of the growth and leave them in the sediment there and maybe cause some future growth, but it's visibility too. So there's a lot of advantages to this with this particular target. Of all the things we've harvested using D.A.S.H, I think Starry Stonewort actually works the best. So containment's important. We use the filter table. There's a set of screens there. We have extra screens on the boat. Actually, that's what's in the foreground there, kind of to the left is another screen, so that as these screens clog, and we have, like I said, a series of different screens with different pore sizes. We run those back to shore, we hose them out, and we bring them back. So again, keeping productivity moving. We don't have to shut down, send a bunch of screens back, clean them, and come back. We're swapping screens out. And when our John boat is going back to shore with the burlap bags, he's also probably bringing screens back and forth so that we keep things moving. Again, these screens allow us to catch that wildlife. So crawfish, catfish. This might be a video also that pay no attention to the soda pop that's there. That's not what that's for them to drink. But sorry if that's loud. What you're hearing in the background is the guy underwater talking about where he's going and what he's doing. You see that that's probably 99% Starry Stonewort. Very few other plants there. It's probably worth mentioning that the Starry Stonewort tends to grow in pretty dense clumps, monoculture areas. They very quickly crowd out any other types of growth. On the fringes of that, of course, is where you do have some intermingling of the different growth types. And so when we're working in the middle, we can go really fast. I mean, we are vacuuming that stuff up because there's not a lot of regard to, not to avoiding something. When you get to the edges, it slows way down. And it's just, you can imagine what I'm saying. It just slows you way down. So maybe it's worth just sacrificing some of those natives just for the sake of covering more ground. But I guess we'll leave that for others to decide. So that's the bulbule that people talk about. That's one of the ways this plant reproduces or spreads. And when we have screens, we have to make sure that the smallest pore size is enough to capture all these things. Again, we were paranoid about containment here, and I think we did a pretty good job. So after it goes through the screen, the water drops out, the bulk of the water drops out, then we're pushing things off into these burlap bags. Again, the former, we'll call it the traditional method of D.A.S.H harvesting, if we were to go right from the water, bypassing that table and going right into this bag, that bulbule will easily pass through the burlap. There's no question. So we had to figure out a way to deal with that. And as these bags dry, and this material dries quickly, that we'll call it the white or the beige material on top of that bag on the right is probably only out of the water for about 4 hours, maybe not even that much. So I mean, this goes from green to that beige color very, very quickly as it dries, and then it becomes incredibly brittle. So we keep these things far away from the lake, and then at some point they get loaded onto a truck. In this particular case, all of this material wound up going to a local winery. They wanted it for their compost pile. And I've not heard back on how that worked for them, but they had a home for it, and off they went. So these kick nets, and that's the blue thing you see here, are what we use when we do stream monitoring. Everybody who's listening to this probably knows about kick nets. But these are handy tools when you're doing D.A.S.H harvesting to catch fragments that may get dislodged or whatever. But as I said, this stuff sinks. So when we're doing Starry Stonewort, we have very little use for kick nets because this material is not floating. It might be attached to another plant that floats and we're trying to grab that. But in a traditional D.A.S.H operation, you're going to be catching a lot of fragments. In this particular case, with this target and with our process, it's not the case. Around our boat, we put these absorbent pigs. Everybody's seen those for oil spills and whatnot. So at all the breaches on the deck that lead out to the water, we surround it with these pigs. So we're capturing everything on the deck itself so that if something is spilling or dumping on the deck, it's not getting back out into the water. I'll talk a little bit about productivity, but that we when you measure a cubic yard, we measure things in cubic yards often. It's where is the cubic yard measured? Is it in situ? Is it in the water when it's kind of spread out and doing its thing with currents or once you pull it out and it starts to compress or compact, and then as you saw in that previous slide, when it dries, it really compacts, right? So at what point do we say we did so many cubic yards? If you measure it in situ, it's going to be a big number. If you measure it, right when you dump it out of the bag, it's smaller. And by the time we get to the winery and dump it out, it's yet smaller. So I'll talk about cubic yards. I believe these will be in situ cubic yards. What it takes up in the water, and it's like, we'll call it its natural state. We stopped filling the bags around 70 pounds. That was the safe handling weight to get it into the John boat and shuttle it back and forth. And we were probably moving 6 bags at a time to and fro. 6 bags times 70 is a lot. And then you got your operator and your outboard motor there. So you just can't overfill that. Otherwise, you're basically pulling your stuff back out of the water. The 6 bags we thought represented a cubic meter of material, not cubic yards. I'm sorry, it's a cubic meter. In our case, 1 bag represented 100, 200 square feet of lake bottom. It's, when I say 100 or 200 square feet, it really depended upon the density of the growth. And so that's a huge range for sure. And when people call and say, well, we want to harvest using D.A.S.H, and I've got X number of square feet, what's it going to cost, or how long is it going to take you? That's an incredibly hard question to answer. We usually give a day rate, and for reasons given, we just don't know until we get there at how much we're going to be able to remove in terms of the square feet of the property. We were filling 20 to 30 bags in 8 hours. Most of the high priority growth, I mentioned this earlier, was in less than 4 feet of water. So the swimming areas, the boating areas, these were areas that were most susceptible to disturbance and therefore spread. And so we concentrated on that. There was not enough money in the budget, nor was there enough time to do all the areas. And so we spoke with the stakeholders about where their priorities were, and we went with that. We're certainly discussing ways to offer greater productivity at lower cost. I mentioned using local volunteers. If we can go out with 2 people instead of 3 or 4, if we can go out with 3 and run 2 divers at a time, and maybe 2 tables on a boat at a time, there's different ways we can configure things that might get greater productivity at a lower cost. Again, I'm open to any suggestions or ideas people have. There's a lot of knowledge gained. Prioritize the work areas. So, right, originally the client wanted us to go up in the river and get it as it's coming into the lake. And while that would have been great, it really ignored the marina where all the disturbance was happening and where the density was incredible. So we really thought that more bang for the buck would be gotten at the marina than there would be on the inlet. We learned too that we have to balance the pump rate, the suction volume, the rate at which material is being sent to the boat, to the filter table drainage. And this goes back a little bit to how many operators do we have up top moving stuff around, how big are the pores, how many filters we have on that table. Dialing that balance in is pretty important. And it goes back to the communication the boat-based staff has with the diver. And so the diver might say, look, and I'm coming up on an area that is less dense. Now's a good time for one of you guys to peel off and go ashore and get what you need, because not a lot coming your way right now, or vice versa. My goodness, this is really dense. Crank up the volume, or crank up my flow rate, and put a couple guys on that table, and let's get ready for what's coming. So I think the balance can be ascertained with a lot of communication up and down. Yeah, the target species comes with a variety. We called it dust. I don't know what it is. It might be sediment that just kind of settles on the targets, but when you disturb it, it's such a fine, almost like dust, underwater. And we see more of that in the shallow areas than the deeper areas. Somebody might know more about why that's the case, but something to remember when you're talking about productivity is you'll probably get a little more done because you can see better in about 4 or 5 feet of water than you can maybe in 3 feet of water. having a variety of screens and screen sizes is a big deal. We bring more than we need because you don't know until you get there, oftentimes, really what's going to work best. I mentioned that Starry Stonewort comes out much easier than other types of aquatic growth, and it sinks. And so going directly into the hose, if the state allows it, if your permit allows it, is the way to go. I think a lot less possibility of missing, we'll call it fragmented Starry Stonewort is going to happen with a direct feed as opposed to hand pulling and then feeding. So if we travel 12 hours from the Chicago region to the Finger Lakes of New York, we don't necessarily know where the Handy Andy or the Ace Hardware or the True Value is, because things absolutely go wrong. It's not if, it's when. And so if this is an endeavor and you want to be productive, I think your staff needs to be able to fix simple machines, replace hoses, belts, clamps, and having an inventory of all of that is, I think, imperative. This is going to be a very frustrating exercise for folks because, like I said, things are going to happen that are going to slow you down. And the more ready you are for that, I think the better the experience is going to be. You know, the fact that we are able to see what's coming up with the harvested material is kind of a secondary use for sample collection or other studies. You know, if people want to do fish surveys or benthic surveys or things like that, I really like the thought of modifying this to be able to pull stuff up out of the water, get it up top where you can see it, spread it, sort it, whatever, and maybe even still be able to get it back to the water. So, you know, if people have a need for that, we're certainly willing to talk to you about that. And there's been a lot of talk afterwards about algicide treatments following harvesting. I mentioned that Wisconsin isn't keen on the use of algicides for Starry Stonewort, but in New York State, this has been shown to be pretty effective at keeping the future spread at bay. And so we like learning more about that. If anybody else has information there, we're very interested in hearing about it. So this graphic here talks a bit about before and after. Starry Stonewort, you saw the left slide earlier. You know, the red are the hot spots where they monitored and found it. The green are the spots where they did not find it. And then we went and harvested, and they did another rake toss and decided that in and around the marinas where most of our work was done, things went pretty well. As you can see, we didn't do anything up in the river, but down around the marina, mission accomplished. I think that was a hugely successful situation there. I want to say on the circle on the left, you don't see a lot of red spots or green spots in that marina area. I don't think a lot was done, but when we went out there and we launched our boat, it was underneath our feet. And so if you look on the graphic on the right, you see some yellow spots, some blue spots, and some green spots where there really wasn't any spots at all. It's because monitoring was done there after we were there and showed that it was clear of Starry Stonewort. Although the yellow spots, it said it's present. You've got, it's interesting. Like I said, it grows in clumps. And so what we were trying to do too is go to the biggest clumps in the highest traffic areas. And so while there may have been areas that were identified and avoided, it wasn't a mistake. I mean, there's only so many hours, and what was the approach here was, okay, how do the boats come in and out? Where are people swimming? And, you know, let's try to focus on those areas. I think they were kind of surprised at the amount that was there in the second go round after we had actually been through there and maybe got closer to it and saw where the stuff was. We got this from the Keuka Lake people, the vegetation survey, and it's, you know, I don't know that it tells us a lot. it lists kind of the distribution of the different species that was identified there. You know, the Starry Stonewort had an average abundance, post-dash of 30.8, pre-dash average abundance of 18.2. You know, what does that say? That, you know, that maybe all the Starry Stonewort sites weren't identified or looked at on the first go around. You know, it certainly didn't spread that fast. You know, one thing that is important to know is that I keep going back to productivity because, you know, we're a service and we're trying to provide the best value for our client. And when you can get out early, and I think there's a future slide here that talks about this, the growth is smaller, and so you're able to go faster versus later in the season when maybe the plant is, or the macrophyte's bigger and spread more. It slows you down, right? You can't cover as many square feet. And when you look at the abundance, you know, earlier in the year versus later in the year, and this is a later growing macrophyte, how much of this is due to the plant growth or the macrophyte growth itself, as opposed to any failures in the process. You know, inarguably, there was a lot removed, and there's less stands of it in the lake after the process. The question becomes, are the stands that were there and not addressed, are they growing really that fast? Sadly, that might be the case, and I think it is. So we've done it 2 years. And as I said, Starry Stonewort is still present, but substantially reduced in density. I understand that there was a company hired to do a algicide application after we had done our work. I don't know what happened there. We'll probably circle back and see. The non-harvested sites obviously would increase in size and density. That's logical. So we started in 2021. We started later than expected. We didn't really know that what we were dealing with when we got there. The growth is what the growth is. It wasn't until the second season, when we got there earlier in the season, we were surprised at how small the growth was. I'm talking about stature of the growth itself, not the footprint of its existence. But starting earlier in the season, I think we were able to be far more productive because we caught it in earlier time. I think the DEC was real pleased with what they saw and has gotten behind this method, which is, I think, encouraging. Looking forward into this year, the board at Keuka Lake has turned over, and I think they're reapplying for grants. I think they're wanting to step back and do some more monitoring to understand the value of the money spent versus the results achieved, and maybe think about other methods. But we're going to pause this year. So we have a lot of disappointed field staff that wanted to go to the Finger Lakes, but no such luck unless anybody out in the audience wants to try it. And we're pretty proud of, I mentioned several times, but it's something we're very proud of. Our folks love nature, and they're intrigued by a lot of what they see. And, you know, we're dealing with a 4-inch pipe. I'm holding my hands out, right? 4-inch pipe underwater. And it's amazing to me that a fish that size can get sucked up the 4-inch pipe. He had quite a ride up onto the table, but he was unharmed and returned back to the water. So we always feel good when we can come up with an approach that has some surprising benefits. Typical species that we, now that guy didn't come up the pipe. I don't know how we got him, but here, this is very typical of what we might have pulled up. Fish of that size. Tadpoles. Nymphs. And that's it. I left 10 minutes. We got a little bit of a late start, and I hope that's enough. And I'll rely on Jen if anybody has any questions in the chat room to feed them to me, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Yeah, it looks like we have quite a few questions in the chat. So the first one we have here is there high potential for Starry Stonewort to come back after removal? And if so, how long does it come back? or how long does it take to come back?
Yeah, it's too early to tell. Is it going to come back? Yes, it's going to come back for sure. The question is, does it come back with the same vengeance as a Eurasian water milfoil, or, is there an opportunity to introduce other species in those areas where you harvested?
Sorry, Keith, can you hear me? I think we might have lost you. We'll just give it a couple minutes and see if he comes back on. Okay, so it seems that Keith has left. So I will type our email in the chat box. If he does not come back on, if you could send your questions to our email address, we will make sure that they get to Keith and that your questions get answered. So we'll just give it a couple minutes to see if he rejoins. Okay.
That was a complete loss of power on our end. I apologize.
No, not a problem. I'm glad you were able to rejoin. So I'll just pull the questions right back up. Thank you everyone for your patience. So I believe we can just move on to the next question if that's okay with you.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I know you touched on a little bit the diameter of the nozzle that you guys use or your divers use. Are there a series of different size nozzles that you guys use depending on the application?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we played around with that, right? So if you have a wider nozzle, the flow through the nozzle is slower. And if we went, say, from a 4 to a 6, is there still enough velocity there to pull the Starry Stonewort up? We haven't tried it, but that would make us more productive. If we were targeting a different plant that maybe had a more secure anchoring system, we may want to go from a 4 to a 3 or even a 2. Now that same pump is pulling a lot more water, you get a lot more velocity, and you might need that added power to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. So playing around with nozzle sizes, absolutely. The other thing we were thinking about is, can we tee that off and run 2 divers with, say, a slightly smaller, right? So instead of 1 4, can we send 2 people down there with 2 3s and cover more ground? Is like, what's the economics of that? So again, conditions will dictate, the visibility, sometimes the target plant, and certainly the substrate, right? A sandier or looser substrate is going to allow you to pull a target up a lot easier than something that's very firm. So some variables there that need to be considered.
Okay, thank you. The next one we have here is, have you tried planting native species, such as wild rice, for example, to take place of invasive plants that are removed?
We tried introducing chara in spots where we've harvested and then tried to fill the void with something native or less aggressive. And that is very similar to Starry Stonewort, right? It's a macrophyte that looks a lot like it and acts a lot like it. We've had some problems with that. And some of it is the turbidity, I think, of some of the sites we've been to didn't allow for establishment of new growth like that. We've done some work in Chicago where we've introduced native plants where the turbidity is quite low and had some better luck. But no, specifically with did you mention rice?
They mentioned wild rice.
Wild rice, yeah, we've not tried it with wild rice. I think replanting right away or trying to introduce something right away is a really good idea. And again, it's going to take some study to show how effective that can be.
Okay, thank you. Another one we have here is there any indication that Starry Stonewort could either support or limit an introduction of other invasive species, such as zebra mussels or quagga mussels, based on the calcium of the stonewort?
Yeah, wow. What a great audience. I'll point to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, or Geneva Lake, Wisconsin, where there's some people up there with a real interest in this, and really have the time to dive into some of that. So the simple question is, I don't know. But if I were to direct somebody somewhere, I would recommend they try to look at Geneva Lake and maybe the Wisconsin DNR. It's some of the things they're doing there that is going down that same path.
Okay, thank you. So we have time for just a couple more questions. I think I'll do 2 more. So this question is, can you speak to how effective this technique is for Eurasian water milfoil?
Yeah, EWM. Personally, I think it's good. It was originally designed or used, in my opinion, for that. And we've deviated from that design to do Starry Stonewort. So the starting point for this process is directed at Eurasian water milfoil. I kept on talking about fragmentation and capturing and the floatables, because that plant will float, or parts of it can float once they're broken apart. So my advice there would be incredibly careful about containment. But if we don't have to go through a sorting table, and I don't want to say have to like it's a bad thing, but if for whatever reason somebody said, I have 100% Eurasian water milfoil, I want this thing to be vacuumed up, and if a couple things get mixed in there, it's not going to bother me. It can be incredibly productive if you're going right into burlap bags. And I've seen a series of racks on a boat, 4 across, with the pipe that spills right into the burlap bag. And as the burlap bag fills, they move the pipe over to the next, and then you replace that like a garbage bag, right? And you move it over to the next, and you move it, and you keep on rotating like that. And it's incredibly productive relative to what I showed you. So for Eurasian water milfoil, I would say yes. My only advice there is watch for fragmentation.
Good answer, thank you. Last question we have is, what is the amount of weight you get in the sorting table of benthic species versus target invasive species? So I guess they're kind of asking like what the ratio is of target species versus non-target species.
Yeah. So when you're in the midst of a very dense stand, I will tell you, it's to my eye, my untrained eye, but to my eye, it's 100%. You're there. And as you get along the fringes, and again, we're trying to be careful. And I'll talk about plants alone. I think we do a really nice job, even on the fringes, of probably staying in the 80% target species and maybe less than 20% non-target plants. And I will tell you, every time you pick up a critter, it's a surprise. Oftentimes when you're down there, the critters are moving away from you, and you're surprised at what you see leaving your area, which is kind of fun. But sometimes they hunker down. And when they hunker down and you pick them up, they go up to the table. So by weight, if you run for an hour, and I don't remember what the weight was that we were pulling up in an hour, but my goodness, I would say, now I'm talking about visible things, right? So things like 3/4 of an inch in size or greater, but there's probably all kinds of things that are much smaller that we're not seeing. But yeah, way less than 5%, way less than probably 2% by weight. Wet weight coming to the table are critters that are being returned. But we feel they're important. And when we're moving hundreds of pounds, those numbers can add up. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I think that's about all the time we have for questions. I will be posting Keith's email and the ISC's email in the chat, so I apologize if we didn't get a chance to read out your question to Keith this morning. I just wanted to thank you again, Keith, for taking the time to present and joining us today. And I did just want to mention that this webinar was recorded, and it'll be posted on either our website or on our YouTube page. And if the audience could take a couple minutes to fill out our survey, we would really appreciate it. So thank you again, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.